Chairman Beyer, Ranking Member Lee, and distinguished members of Congress. My name is Amy Swear, and I'm a legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. A major focus of my scholarship is the Second Amendment and gun policy. I am not an economist, but it doesn't take an economist to tell you that gun violence has an enormous negative impact on the nation's economy. Of course it does. At the end of the day, though, what this committee wants isn't a debate over the total dollar amount we can attribute to gun violence. Instead, you want to know who's responsible for it, for those costs, and what Congress can do to save lives and lower the economic burden. In other words, this is fundamentally a gun policy hearing, just like the dozens of other gun policy hearings held on Capitol Hill in recent years. In that respect, my testimony should sound fairly familiar. The reality of gun violence, who causes it, and what to do about it hasn't changed just because we put an economic spin on the question. To summarize, lawful gun owners are largely not the ones at fault for gun violence or its costs. On the contrary, the protective economic value they provide is underacknowledged and underappreciated. The bulk of gun violence costs are due to criminal actions, which are most often committed by unlawful gun owners. Yes, a small minority of lawful gun owners will at some point use their legally purchased and possessed firearms to commit crimes, but the overwhelming majority of them will never harm themselves or others with their guns and will never add a single cent to the overall economic burden of gun violence. On the contrary, most violent crimes, including gun crimes, are committed by a small number of serial offenders who are often prohibited from possessing firearms, but who obtain them anyway through illegal or informal channels. It's not just that lawful gun owners aren't the problem or that they, as a class, are unfairly blamed for crimes they don't commit. It's that to whatever extent a few lawful gun owners may be responsible for gun violence and its economic costs, other lawful gun owners foot their bill and then some. The research is clear that Americans use their guns defensively far more often than many people realize, somewhere between 500,000 and 3 million times a year. And those defensive gun uses are not just about gun owners protecting their property. Often those lawful gun owners save lives, sometimes many lives. Consider the 22-year-old who just this week fatally shot a would-be mass shooter at an Indiana mall, one of 3 armed citizens who stopped active shooters in just the last 2 months without any injuries to themselves or others as a result of their defensive actions. This is not an uncommon outcome for defensive gun users. Based on the research and my experience with the Heritage Foundation's defensive gun use database, victims who use firearms to defend themselves or others from criminal actions are rarely injured. When they are injured, the majority of the time those injuries are relatively minor, especially compared to how serious they might otherwise have been. The chronology of those injuries is important. Most of the time, those injuries occur before the defensive gun use, meaning the defensive gun use stopped the victimization and limited the economic impact of crimes that were already in progress. Not only do lawful gun owners regularly thwart crimes, but there's a lot of evidence that every year a good number of criminals are deterred from committing a good number of crimes precisely because they're afraid victims might be armed. It turns out many criminals are rational actors who don't like it when people shoot back. Despite this, commonly proposed gun control policies nonetheless often assume that lawful gun owners comprise a bulk of the problem. And some of those policies are frankly just unconstitutional. At the same time, many of the policies that would be most effective at combating gun violence don't fit neatly into the current national narrative, but they would save lives and lessen the economic impact of gun violence. My written testimony is far more in depth, and I hope you read it, but I'll highlight just one avenue that is particularly relevant for this committee. Gun violence is inextricably linked to social capital. That is, to all of the various elements of associational life, like our connections with our families, our jobs, communities, and civic institutions. Americans are often best served by government simply getting out of their way, especially when it comes to private voluntary associations. But from a federal policy perspective, one solution to the decline in social capital is to promote economic growth and employment, which increase family stability and individual connectedness through the workplace. And I hope we talk more during this hearing about how exactly to accomplish this. And I also hope we talk more about better enforcing existing laws, expanding access to and options for mental health treatment, and encouraging responsible gun ownership without preemptively hindering gun owners from defending themselves. Congressman, none of these are new solutions, but this isn't a new problem or even a new conversation about an old problem. The analysis is the same because the problem is the same. I hope the response is different, and I look forward to your questions.